Yesterday, before I dropped by Dad's store, I was a loving husband with a wife I would die for and two friends that I enjoyed greatly. I had a very successful construction business and a great future. I was looking forward to the time my wife and I would have a child. Today, I am a bitter a-hole bent on destroying my wife and friends. Oh, I don't plan to do anything to get myself put in jail, but hell, who knows? I might slip up and go berserk. I suppose you might want to know why I changed overnight? Well, I didn't really change overnight. Rather, I began worrying several months ago and changed in the blink of an eye. Listen to my tale of woe and follow along as I careen down the pathway of revenge. Let's start with the story. I lived and went to college in the same town I grew up in. All my friends, minus the few that moved away or had died for some reason, lived nearby. My father owned and operated the local building supply center and hardware store. He had wanted me to get my degree and come back to help him, eventually to take over the store. When I was young, he had forced me to work in the store. I spent many evenings and weekends there before I got out of high school and during college. I enjoyed talking to the contractors that purchased their material from Dad. When I made deliveries, I watched how they built things and asked questions of them. I can't say I hated the job in Dad's store, but I didn't like it. The best part of the work was going on deliveries to help unload and later making the deliveries by myself. I really did not want to take over the store. When I was not working in the store, I did like many boys in town and mowed yards for pocket money. One day, I was working for a widow and watching her try to repair a storage building in her yard. She was having a lot of trouble, partly because she did not have the proper tools for the job, partly because she was not strong enough to do the heavy work, and partly because she just plain did not know how to proceed. Finally, when I finished the yard, I offered to help her. At first, she was hesitant because I was just a 15-year-old boy. To this day, I do not know where I got the courage to push her to hire me, but I did. I told her it was obvious she was not able to do the work, and I thought I was. I told her some of the things I saw her doing that were wrong and pointed out that she just was not strong enough or tall enough to do the job. I told her I would do it for $50 if she bought the materials. I told her if she did not like the work after I was finished, she did not have to pay me. Finally, she agreed to let me do the work. I did the job to her satisfaction and she paid me. She actually did something more valuable for me than give me the money, though. She began telling her older single friends about my work and how good a job I did for her both on the repair and in mowing her yard. I began getting calls from other women wanting me to repair things for them. I was always careful to do the work correctly. If I did not know how to do something, I would ask one of my contractor friends. I always charged less than a real, licensed contractor would charge. After I had worked for several older women, I began to get calls from men and families. By the time I was in college, I had a small handyman business and had many of the necessary licenses to do the work. I also still had my lawn care business. I had to hire my friends to help from time to time to keep up, especially in the summer. I was making enough money in the evenings, weekends, and summer to pay for my college, a newer truck, and my dates. I was also able to enjoy my youth, although I have to admit I did work long hours, and my dates always started later than most boys' dates did. After I graduated high school, I got tired of living with my parents and rented an apartment. I lived in the apartment during my first year of college. I did not enjoy apartment living, so began looking for a house to rent after the year's lease ran out. One of my friends from high school had just divorced one of my best buddies, Joe. She had caught him cheating with one of our classmates and filed for the divorce. Glenda worked as a real estate agent and struggled to make ends meet. We were talking one evening, commiserating about her failed marriage at our favorite hangout. We both lived in apartments and neither one of us liked it. I told her I was thinking about renting a house. I asked her if she had any reasonably priced rental properties she could show me. She asked how much I could pay. When I told her, she looked shocked and said, "Hell, Stan, with a 30-year loan, you could buy a pretty nice house for that much a month. Why don't you buy a house instead of rent? That way you could build equity instead of pouring your money down a deep empty rat hole as rent." I told her I had never considered that. I said I didn't have too much for a down payment. "Well, let me do some checking and I'll get back to you," she said. When I left the hangout, I managed to get an older friend to buy me some beer. By the time the evening was over, I forgot about our conversation, but she sure didn't. I guess the thought of a nice commission does that to you, though. The next Monday evening, Glenda called me and asked to meet her at the bar again. In our town, we had several bars that served burgers and sodas in a small room where underage people could eat. When I walked in, she had some papers in front of her, and she seemed excited. Almost before I got seated, she began talking, Stan, I found several places that I think you can afford, but most of them aren't in very good locations. I did find one place for sale that I think you might like. Do you remember the old Harris place on the edge of town? I nodded yes, and she continued. Well, when they got older, they built a nice new 3-car garage and put a mother-in-law apartment over it. I think they were planning to use it for a live-in caregiver if the need arose. The new garage was several feet from the house. 2 years ago, you remember the house caught fire? I shook my head yes again, and she said, well, they decided not to rebuild and moved into a retirement community here in town. The garage was not damaged too badly during the fire. I was talking to AITA the other day, and she said they were tired of paying the taxes on the place and doing what little upkeep they did. She said they wanted to sell the place, and I listed it. It is 20 acres, and they are asking $110,000 for it. You would have to do a little work on the garage and apartment, but it would be great for you. The best thing is all the utilities are already in. There are several newer houses going up in the area, so I really expect a contractor to try and buy it soon and subdivide it. It isn't in the multi-list book yet, so it hasn't shown but a time or two. They would only need about $20,000 down, Stan. A 20-year payment would be about half the rent you now pay monthly, so if you could make the down payment, I really think this would be a good deal for you. I thought about it for a while. I didn't have that much money, but from what I remembered of the place, I really wanted it badly. I told her I wanted to look at it the next evening. Later that evening, I went to Dad and asked if he would loan me the down payment. I have to admit he was not real anxious to do so, but I reminded him the monthly payments on the land would be half the rent I now paid, so I could pay him some back each month after I got the apartment repaired and livable. We finally agreed he would loan me the down payment if I wanted to buy the place after I saw it. That next evening, I went to the place and fell in love with it all over again. Even with the burned-out shell of the house there, it was even prettier than I remembered. The fire didn't even kill all the trees and shrubs in the yard. I could look down the hill to a small stream meandering through the property. I told Glenda to write up an offer of $90,000. Tuesday evening after classes, I got a call from Glenda. She sounded excited and said, Stan, I can't believe it. When I presented the offer to AITA and Homer, they were going to reject it out of hand. I was getting ready to leave when she turned to Homer and asked him if he thought you were the nice young man that had cut their yard all those years. They asked me if you had a mowing service in school, and when I told them you did, they smiled and began telling me what a nice young man you were. Anyway, they won't take $90,000 for the place, but they did counter with $97,500. Isn't that great? I didn't think for very long. I said, yeah, that's fine. Tell them I will pay that, and I want possession at closing. The bank required my father to co-sign the loan, but it went through, and I got possession of the property in late April. I made the necessary repairs and moved into the apartment the 1st of June. The next few months, I kept busy on my summer business of yard work and small building projects. By now, I had 10 employees, most of them seasonal. I had a little time to date Patty and begin to clean up my property. After I got the trash from the burned house cleared away, I had an engineer friend look at the foundation. He decided the foundation was sound since the subflooring had not burned through. The fire had been in the attic and second floor primarily, so I could use it to rebuild. This would save several $1,000s because I did not have to do as much dirt work and didn't need to pour a new cement foundation. The house had been a smaller, older structure of about 1,000 square feet on the first floor. I rented a backhoe and extended a foundation toward the garage. Doing almost all the work myself, I began to use my spare time and spare cash to build myself a nice home. I connected the house to the garage with an enclosed cement-floored, glassed and breezeway. I made arrangements to put a large hot tub on the cement pad in the breezeway. I put a wood stove in this area for heat and ducted into the rest of the house as I built it. The summer I got out of college, I finished the house. It was 2,450 square feet, and I built it for comfort and convenience. I had stainless appliances, granite countertops, oak trim, and brick exterior. In short, it wasn't a McMansion, but it was a very upscale home. I had a beautiful covered patio facing south overlooking the small stream. I had finished it for about half the cost it would have sold for. Patty loved it. When we got married, I almost got the impression Patty was marrying me for my house instead of myself. By the time I got out of college, I had graduated to building new structures. I built additions, repaired older homes and buildings and garages too, but now a lot of my income came from new structures. I now had 20 employees. Patty began working for my father in his business when we became engaged. After she got her degree, she became a full-time person and assistant manager. He was grooming her for manager when he retired. I was an only child, so the business would pass to us upon his death. I bought all my materials from Dad, so we compounded the family profits from my construction business. My wife Patty and I were childhood sweethearts, and I thought like most married men that we would be together forever. Oh, sure, we had the normal squabbles like any married couple, but they were minor. When we were dating in high school and later in college, we had broken up like most young couples do. We both dated others and were intimate with others during that time, but we always came back together because we could not find anyone we loved more. I did have one girl that might have been the one, but one of my friends had her tied up before we made that decision. Finally, in our last year of college, Patty and I became a solidly exclusive couple. That Christmas, I asked her to marry me, and she said yes. Patty set the wedding date in September after we graduated. The wedding almost didn't happen even then because of Patty's insistence on a prenuptial agreement. Now I wish we hadn't married. Oh, well, on with the sad story. Apparently, Patty had inherited several $100,000 from her grandfather, and she, or maybe her father, did not want me to get my hands on it. I told her I had no desire to spend her money, and I resented the fact she thought I would marry her for it. In any event, we were not speaking very kindly to each other the night she told me about the prenuptial agreement. I suppose, now, that I was lucky that was an evening my parents were out for a drive and decided to stop off and see me. When Patty heard them knocking on the door, she was so angry she flounced out as I let them in. Before she went past them on the landing, I heard her say, "You need to talk some sense into your son, or this wedding may never occur." Dad and Mom watched as she stormed to her car and drove off. I was still standing with the prenup in my hands when they turned to me and asked what our argument was about. I told them, and Mom said, "Oh, Stan, we thought it might be something important. Honey, we know you aren't marrying her for her money, so what's the big problem? Sign the darn thing and marry the girl if you love her." Dad was sitting with a frown on his face and asked if he could see the agreement. He looked it over closely and said, "This seems pretty straightforward, except she did not have the attorney exempt your place here or your potential inheritance from us from the community property. It seems fair that if she exempts her funds and anything she may inherit from her side of the family, that the same should be exempt for you, son. Why don't we take this to the business attorney and have him make suggestions?" I reached for the agreement and read it through. Dad was right. It only addressed her money and her inheritances. I began to get angry again. I agreed with him, and he said he would make an appointment for me. I had used his attorney for my few legal needs, so I guess he was really my attorney also. I got an appointment for the following Tuesday, and the attorney agreed with Dad. He scanned the agreement into his computer and made the changes we discussed. When he finished revising the agreement, it exempted my land and business, and anything I might inherit, just as it exempted the same thing for Patty. I went to her home the evening my attorney finished the changes to the agreement. I had already signed it. When Patty and her father read the new agreement, they both became angry. He looked at me and said, "Just what is the idea of changing the agreement we prepared, young man? I thought you loved my daughter, and now you are accusing her of wanting to take your house and business? You know, when you marry, that will become her home also. If, heaven forbid, you divorce, don't you think she would deserve a place to live?" I became angry with him and replied, "Yes, sir. She would deserve a place to live, but it seemed fair to my father and to me that if the possessions she had before we marry and her potential inheritance were to be protected in case of divorce, the same should apply to me. You will note that any accumulation we have from earnings or investments during the marriage would be divided equally unless the marriage ends due to infidelity. In that case, each of us would leave with what we brought into the marriage or inherited, and the non-injured party would leave with 75% of the marital assets accumulated after the marriage. I feel that there should be some penalty built into the agreement as a compensation or punishment for any infidelity." Patty and her father were way beyond upset. They were furious about the proposed agreement. Needless to say, for the next few days, things were very tense between Patty and me. I asked several times why she was so upset about the agreement, since she was the one that wanted a prenuptial agreement. Most of the time, Patty said it was because I wanted to turn her out in the street if we divorced, and she loved that house as much as I did. She didn't think it was fair for me to get to keep her home if we divorced. I was almost ready to ask for my ring back when she began to thaw. She signed the changed agreement, but it took us several weeks to get back to where we were before she asked for a prenuptial agreement. We finally forgot our anger and forgave each other for the hurt feelings raised by the prenuptial agreement. We married as planned, and for the next 2.5 years we did not look back and were never sorry. We never looked at another person as a lover, or at least I didn't. Now I know Patty did. I caught her yesterday. The only problem I had with Patty working in the lumberyard was all the flirting she had to put up with. I admit I was a little jealous, but I knew many of the men that purchased items from Dad. They were sex hounds, and Patty was a beautiful, fun-loving woman. One of my friends, Joe, was already divorced because he couldn't keep his pecker in his pants. Many times I would go into the store and find him flirting with Patty. I won't say we argued over him or the flirting she did with other men, but we did have some spirited discussions. Patty maintained that she needed to flirt a little to keep the customers happy. I told her I thought she just needed to treat them nice, friendly, and be their friend, not a flirt. Of course, she took exception to me calling her actions flirting and said that was just what she was doing. My college degree was in construction management and Patty got one in business administration, so our degrees supported our vocations very well. Shortly after I got out of college, I decided we had enough money to build a home on speculation. Dad let me be an exception to his rule requiring all accounts to be paid at the end of the month. He said since I was family, I could draw up to $100,000 on account and pay when a house sold. He did keep a lien against the properties, however, in case something happened to me. All other customers were supposed to pay in full monthly. I was good at my work and knew it. I was a general contractor, but I used very few subcontractors. I had my own framing, drywall, finishing, plumbing, and wiring crews. I did hire the heating and air done. I even used my still operating yard care crews to landscape and put in yards on my projects, assuming, of course, that the clients would hire us to do so. In any event, I used the speculation house to keep my crews busy during off periods. I did not want to lay my men off if I didn't have to, so I tried to keep them busy. We finished the spec house and it sold before we had the yard in. I started another and it sold before it was finished, and we finished it to the new owner's desires. Now I had enough money saved to do 2 spec homes at once. All at once the business was booming and I almost didn't have time to do the smaller jobs that had once been my bread and butter. Between Patty's salary and my profits, we were in tall clover. We were rapidly becoming one of the highest income families in our small town of about 25,000 souls. All our success came at a price though. I would work 8 to 10-hour days with the crews and do paperwork before and after the day's construction. Evenings I would meet with customers and potential customers that worked to make bids and discuss progress on their projects. Patty took to working late in the office to do her books. We seemed to have less and less time together. Many times I would go by the building center and see her car and 2 or 3 others there. Sometimes I would go in and there would be Joe or one of our other classmates sitting talking to her. They all worked in the building trade, so were supposedly getting prices from her, but something just didn't feel right. Sometimes Patty would be flushed when I went into the office, and many times they would be drinking beer. Of course, I would have one with them, and we would visit, but things felt wrong to me. Finally, I decided to disable the local buzzer on the building alarm. Normally, when someone entered the building by any of the doors, a buzzer went off. I disabled the one on the entrance from the warehouse. Yesterday, before I dropped by Dad's store, I was a loving husband with a wife I would die for and 2 friends that I enjoyed greatly. I had a very successful construction business and a great future. I was looking forward to the time my wife and I would have a child. Today, I am a bitter a-hole bent on destroying my wife and friends. Oh, I don't plan to do anything to get myself put in jail, but hell, who knows? I might slip up and go berserk. I suppose you might want to know why I changed overnight? Well, I didn't really change overnight. Rather, I began worrying several months ago and changed in the blink of an eye. Listen to my tale of woe and follow along as I careen down the pathway of revenge. Last night when I went past the store, Joe's and George's trucks were both in the lot. I turned into the lot and went to the door with the disabled buzzer. I knew before I even got to Patty's office what I would find. I could hear her moaning and screaming from halfway across the building. I took out my cell phone and set it to take pictures. The damn witch didn't even have her office door closed. She was bent over her desk and Joe had his pants down. He was standing behind her and having sex with her. Finally, he pulled back from Patty. She continued to lie over her desk. George walked up beside Patty and helped her stand. He pulled her to him and gave her a deep French kiss, then said, "Here, honey, let's get you naked. I want to play with you." I watched and took a picture while George helped Patty strip. I was going to get a picture of him having sex with her, then go in and wreak some bodily harm on my 2 ex-friends. I backed from the doorway so they wouldn't see me until I was ready. I remembered Dad usually had a tape recorder in his office and went to see if it was there. I wanted to tape some of the conversation if I could. I found the tape recorder and brought it back. I sat it on the floor beside the door as I watched my wife service my 2 ex-friends. They continued for a few more minutes. I was further infuriated by the conversation I taped. As she stood up, I heard Joe say, "Damn, Patty, aren't you glad you let me drill you again at the Christmas party 2 years ago?" I told you it would be the best damn sex you ever had in your life, didn't I? I was talking to Jared the other day and told him about the hot honey I was doing now, and he wants to meet you. Are you sure you won't let him come in some evening also? Patty pushed him away and turned her head to him. No, I don't mind doing you too. Hell, I love doing you too, but I don't want or need anyone else. I didn't like him when we were in school, and I still don't. The one time he screwed me before Stan and I got married, he was an a-hole. He hurt me and didn't even make sure I enjoyed myself. I always enjoyed our time together before we got married, and I still enjoy it. If you can keep your damn mouth shut, we can keep this up forever, but you have to be careful. Stan is getting really pissed at the way you two are acting when he can see us. If you don't cool it, I will have to cut you off. I decided I had enough on tape and enough pictures. I had picked up a ball bat when I was in Dad's office when I was there. I was going to put the hurt on Joe and George. I picked it up and started into the room when I had a thought. George had always been really jealous. He was married to his high school sweetheart still. She and I had dated several times. In fact, they did not become serious until after Patty and I became engaged. I had enjoyed sex with her, so I thought I might just see if I could seduce her before I did a number on him. In fact, that would probably be a better payback than just knocking him around. He always cried in high school when she and he were on the outs, and he hated it the few times I had dated her. I quietly backed from the room and left the building. I did set the alarm and reattach the buzzer wires on the door as I left. I couldn't wait for the excitement when Patty and her two friends set off the burglar alarm when they walked across the showroom floor to leave. The alarm keypads were beside the doors, and there were motion sensors in the main part of the building, so before they could discover the alarms were set, the alarms would go off. I knew she would be able to disable the alarm, but the damage would be done. She would wonder how it got set, and she would have to wait in the building for the police to come. I wondered how she would explain the alarm, and if Joe and George would have enough sense to leave before the police got there. Patty was very late getting home. She came into the house and walked up to me very nervously. I watched her face, and she seemed scared. I smiled to myself and asked her, "What's the matter, honey? You seem nervous, and you're a lot later than you usually are." Patty licked her lips and sat on the edge of her chair facing me. She said, "I was working late. We couldn't get the books to balance, and I didn't think I would ever find the problem. What were you doing tonight? I thought you might come by or at least call since I was so late. And no, I'm getting used to you being late, and I didn't feel like coming by and drinking beer with you and your boyfriends." Patty's face got white, then she blushed. "Damn you, Stan. I keep telling you nothing's going on. Joe and George weren't even there. Why can't you get it through your damn head that I have to visit with them to keep them happy?" "Okay, honey," I said. "I know you have to schmooze the customers. I just drove by about 6:30 and thought I saw their trucks there." Well, they were there then. They came in just about closing time, and I had to wait for them to pay for and load their order before I got to the books. They were gone shortly after closing. I just meant they weren't there the whole time I was. "I'm tired. I'm going to take a nice hot bath and go to bed." I smiled and said, "Great. I'll be there in a jiffy. I've been horny all day." Patty looked worried again and said, "No, I'm sorry, honey. I'm really bushed. I don't feel like it tonight. Why don't we have a quickie in the morning before we go to work?" I just smiled to myself. I thought it would be a cold day in hell before I went for sloppy seconds. I wondered how many times I had gotten them without knowing it. I made a mental note too that I needed to get tested for diseases also. I had just said that to jerk Patty's chain. The next morning early, I left before Patty woke up. As soon as my attorney's office opened, I called for an appointment. He managed to fit me in at noon if I would take him out for lunch. I agreed, and we grabbed a quick meal at a sandwich shop near his office. He wanted to talk about the problem there, but I asked him if we could just eat in a hurry and go back to his office. He said, "Of course, but what could be so secret we can't talk here? I do a lot of business over lunch." I just told him it was sensitive to my business, and I didn't want things to get out until I had all the I's dotted and the T's crossed. When we got to his office, I began explaining what the problem was. I told him I wanted a divorce immediately based on Patty's adultery and wanted the prenuptial enforced to the letter. I showed him the pictures and let him listen to the tape. I also told him I would appreciate it if he only showed the pictures of Joe and Patty and didn't use the tape unless he had to. "Why do you want to keep George out of it?" he asked. "Well, I'm not sure you will approve, but after the divorce I have some plans for George. I don't want to tip him off, and..." Lawrence, the attorney, broke in on my conversation. "Well, Haas, I hope you aren't planning anything violent. I have to report something like that as an officer of the court." I laughed and said, "No, I'm not planning violence. I used to date George's wife, Susan. She and he dated and broke up several times, and twice I dated her during the breakup. They almost always go to Murphy's Tavern on weekends. I think I'm going to make some moves on Susan to piss George off. I want to give her the info I have on him cheating, but I want to play with his mind first. She will get a heads up on this, and I will get a little payback on good old George. He used to get so angry every time she dated someone else, and I hear he gets jealous when she spends too much time dancing with other people. I just want to see if I can seduce her after my divorce is final and let him find out about it. I guess you could say I want to give him a dose of his own medicine. I also intend to try and seduce Joe's fiancée. There will be no violence unless one of those a-holes starts it. Stan, I don't like this. It could blow up in your face, but you were right. There is nothing illegal about seducing a woman, but you should know they could sue you for alienation of affection. I laughed and said, let them bring it on. I will countersue, and I have pictures and a tape to use in that suit. Don't you think it would be almost a wash? Lawrence leaned back in his chair and thought a moment. Finally, he said, yes, the suits could possibly balance out if one is filed, but you need to remember you might have larger assets than do they. Even if you both won the lawsuits in court, you might come out worse off financially if there is a judgment against you. Besides, don't you think that is a disgusting thing to do to those ladies? I suppose they will be hurting enough just finding out about their men cheating on them. If you use them like that, it will surely hurt them worse. I have to admit, my heart was made of stone now. I said, I don't care. They took that chance when they chose those cheating a-holes. Wednesday, I received a phone call from Lawrence. He told me the divorce was ready to file and he planned to serve Patty that afternoon. Great, I said. I'll get busy and change the locks on the doors this morning. I will pack as many of her clothes as I can and put them on the front porch. I am going to place pictures of her and Joe on every door so she can see them when she comes over. Oh boy, I don't know who was the angriest when the shit hit the fan at Dad's store. I got a phone call from 3 very angry people within minutes of Patty being served. She called and had a screaming fit, then told me I would be sorry I was ever born. Dad called just after she stomped from the store. Her father called and blessed me out just after I hung up from talking to Dad. While I was talking to Dad, I said, Dad, I really need to thank you for talking me into that prenuptial agreement. I filed for the divorce because I walked into the office Saturday night and found Patty having sex on her desk with Joe and George. I have pictures and a tape. Thanks to you, I will get to keep my home and business as well as 3/4 of our assets. I do think you should change your store locks and the computer passwords in case she decides to do something we wouldn't appreciate. I suggest you fire her, but that is your decision. You need to decide if you can trust her after this. Damn, son. I just can't believe that. Right here in the store? Yeah, I'll have the girls get right on the changes to the computer and so forth. We'll be over this evening to talk some more. When Dad and Mom came to my home that evening, they were devastated. Mother, especially, had loved Patty. She was the daughter they never had. I convinced them that it would be best if they let Patty go. I said, and I really believed that Patty might do something to damage the business if she remained in her position. The next morning, when Patty found out she not only lost her husband, but she had lost her job, she became really angry. The next Monday, I received a countersuit for the divorce, and Dad was served with a suit for wrongful dismissal. It looked like we were going to be giving Lawrence a lot of money over this mess. We decided to have an outside accountant do an audit of the business also. I was sitting in the bar Tuesday evening when Glinda walked in. Like most friends in our town, she didn't ask if she could join me. She just plopped down into the booth across from me. What's this I hear about you and Patty? She asked. I said, depends on what you heard, but I suppose most of the rumors are true. I caught her and Joe screwing in her office after work the other day. I got pictures and filed for divorce. The way it is going around town is you got jealous about her having male friends and talking with them in the store, so you filed for divorce. She is also saying you were vindictive and got your father to fire her so she couldn't even live. I laughed and said, well, Dad did let her go, but it was because she did what she did in the office and because he had our CPA come in and check the books. I can't say what they found, but she had made some other mistakes also. Now can we just let it go? Yeah, I'm sorry though. I know how you feel. That damn Joe did the same thing to me, you know. A-hole never could keep his pecker in his pants except when he was at home. I saw a small tear run down Glenda's cheek. I reached over and wiped it from her face, then said, yeah, I think he screwed almost all the girls he ever dated and a lot of other men's wives. That was partly why I didn't want Patty to flirt with him or be alone with him. I really didn't think he would turn on a friend like that though. Glinda and I downed a couple beers while we visited, then I walked her out to her car. Just before she got into the vehicle, she gave me a gentle kiss on the cheek. "It'll get better, Stan. I promise." Days seemed to drag on. Work came and went. Some of my friends gathered around me to support me in my sorrow. Some gathered around to support Patty and were no longer friends. Dad's trial for wrongful dismissal was to begin on a Monday. I was at home the Sunday before when I heard a voice calling to me from the side of the house. I have to admit, I did not rise to greet my visitor. In fact, I fell on my bum trying to do so. I had been communing with John Barleycorn all afternoon, and I am afraid he tripped me up. Well, to be precise, when I tried to get up from my Adirondack patio chair, I got my foot caught and fell on my bum. There I was lying on the ground in a puddle of spilled Glenmorangie, looking up the dress of one of my best supporters. Linda was standing looking down at me laughing. She squatted to help me up. "Can you even stand by yourself?" I have to admit I giggled more than I laughed when I said, "Well, I thought I could, but here I am lying at your feet when I tried to do it." Before she could help me up, Glinda broke out in a loud laugh at my comment. She did help me to stand, and I was able to do so more or less by myself after we quit laughing. I invited her to sit in one of the chairs across from me, and I more or less fell back into mine. Linda was becoming almost a fixture around my house. Other than my mother, she was almost my only feminine companion, and I treasured her company. Unfortunately, today I really didn't want to see anyone, and I am afraid it showed in our talk. Finally, Glinda looked at me and asked, "Stan, did I do something to make you angry?" I felt my chest heave and my eyes began running. I hurt and could not talk. I scrunched up my face and just shook my head at Glinda. "No," I whispered. "You are almost the only one who even comes around any longer." Today, I have been feeling sorry for myself. I have also been thinking about the court case tomorrow. A few months ago, I thought I had it all: a loving wife, a great business, the American dream. Now all I have is a broken heart, busted marriage, and I am facing court battles to keep me and my family's material possessions. I am so angry with life, and with what Patty did to me, I have turned most of my friends against me. All I know is I want to hurt Patty, Joe, and George and Patty's parents so badly they will be sorry they ever heard of me. That is almost all I think of any longer. I have plans, and they are not very nice. I know when I follow through on them, you will leave me too, and damn it, I don't want that, but I can't help it. I want to hurt those a-holes, and I know when I do it will hurt me too. Linda rose from her chair and sat in my lap. She wrapped her arms around me and just held me. "Why, Stan? Why do you think I will leave you if you take revenge on those a-holes? Haven't we been friends all our lives? What are you planning to do that is so bad? I don't understand why you were angry with George, though." "Oh, Stan, please promise me you won't hurt them." "No, Glinda." "Well, I guess that depends on how you define that. I don't intend to physically damage them unless they come after me first. I intend to do my best to drive Joe into bankruptcy and out of town. I intend to use all the money I can spare to take care of him and George for that matter. Unfortunately for our friendship, I think what I intend to do besides that will run you off. You see, Glinda, I intend to steal their women just like they stole mine." Glinda pushed herself back from me and looked me in the eyes. "What? Stan, you're not going to? What do you mean? And you still haven't told me why you want to hurt George also." "Simple. I haven't told anyone, but George was one of Patty's lovers, so I owe him some pain. I'm going to move in on their women and bed them. I'm going to make them love me and take them from their men like they took Patty from me, and I am going to make sure Joe and George find out about it." "Stan, you can't do that." "What about the poor girls? That will hurt them too." "Stan, please don't do that. It would devastate those poor girls more than just knowing what a cheating a-hole their man was. They would fall in love with you, and then when they found out you were just playing them, it would gut them. I can't believe you would even think about doing something like that. They're hurt enough just being with those cheating a-holes." Glinda pushed herself back from me and struggled to stand. When she got to her feet, she looked down at me. "Stan, you're right. If you do something that despicable, I don't know what I'll do, but..." Glinda turned and stomped out of my yard. I heard her car drive off shortly thereafter. My divorce was proceeding rapidly. Since we had such a good prenuptial agreement, it was mostly a slam dunk. I only had to wait for the normally slow movement of the courts. The trial for wrongful dismissal, however, was another matter. We were all nervous when the trial started. Patty's attorney made my father and me look like ogres. He twisted our every sentence and tried to put words in our mouths. Finally, things began to look up when our attorney began his questioning. He brought out how much time Patty spent visiting and flirting with customers. He called witnesses both from within and without the company to verify the behavior. He brought out the fact she routinely drank beer at the store, and while it was not illegal if done away from the business area, he made it look like she was ignoring her duties to do so. Lawrence called Dad's accountant, and this was one witness that did enormous damage to Patty. The accountant said that Patty had authorized Joe and George to exceed their preset spending limits, and she had authorized them extra time to pay. In fact, their accounts were 3 months past due, and they were only making token payments. Patty's attorney then asked about my large credit account and the fact I did not pay it off every month like the business required for other customers. My father said that was true, but that he had made a special deal with me and took an ownership interest in my structures to protect the business in case I defaulted. He got the cost of the materials I purchased for the buildings plus a 3% ownership for advancing me the materials. He pointed out that Patty had not only exceeded her authority in allowing Joe and George the higher credit, but that she had not even tried to protect the business in case they defaulted. Finally, the hearing ended after 2 days of testimony. When the decision was handed down, Patty and her father were almost charged with contempt of court. They were very loudly complaining because the decision went against her. In fact, the judge said, "Ms. Tremaine, you should thank your lucky stars your father-in-law chose not to refer this to the authorities. I think he could make a case for criminal negligence, perhaps even theft against you and your 2 accomplices. I would suggest you remove yourself from this courtroom, and I would further suggest you think about the kindness shown you by these people. If they had countersued, I strongly believe they could have won a substantial settlement from you." Patty and her father were sputtering, and her face was white as they were escorted from the courtroom. As I was leaving the courtroom, Lawrence stopped me and said, "Stan, I have good news for you also. Just before the hearing began this morning, I was informed the judge signed off on your divorce. In 30 days, your marriage will be over. Do you want me to mail the papers, or will you pick them up?" That evening, my parents and I were sitting on their patio relaxing after the trial. We were both glad and sad. We were glad we all came through unscathed, except for the legal bills, and sad that my marriage and their relationship with Patty ended the way they did. We had done a barbecue and were now sitting with our liquid refreshments while we just chilled out. In truth, we were all feeling the effects of the liquor. I was just at the point of telling my parents how bitter I was. I said, "I still can't believe my friends would do something like that to me, much less that Patty would. If it takes me the rest of my life, I am going to make them pay for this." My mother looked at me in shock and said, "Oh, Stan, please don't do that. A man that lives with bitterness is a poor excuse of a man. Take the high road and live your life to the fullest. In the long run, that will make your life more fulfilling and could even make those 3 sorry for what they did." We heard the tap, tap, tap of small footsteps on the sidewalk just before we heard a female voice say, "Thank you, Mrs. Tremaine. That is just what I have been trying to get him to do. If anyone can feel the pain he does, it is I, and I think I have risen above it." At first, I was just like Stan. I wanted nothing more than to eviscerate Joe. Bit by bit, as time went past, I began to let my anger and my desire for revenge slip away. One day I realized I not only didn't care any longer, but I realized in almost every way I was better off without the cheating a-hole. Glenda came fully onto the patio and looked directly at me. She continued, "Stan, I know how empty you feel now. I know the feelings that are still burning through your consciousness, but believe me, dwelling on them just make them worse. Please, please let the anger go and get on with your life. Just next time, be more careful. Be more sure of the friends you choose and the woman you take into your heart. If you were to be honest, and admitting hindsight is 20/20ths, I bet you can see the seeds of this heartbreak existed before you married Patty. I know I could and still can see that in Joe. He always had an eye for the ladies and always chatted them up. He was always more attentive to them when we were out than he was to me, but I thought I was in love with him. I know you have said Patty was a lot like that. She always flirted with other men and reveled in their attention. Look into your heart and use this knowledge to better yourself. Don't lower yourself to their level and hurt someone. In the long term, it won't make you feel any better." I looked up at Glenda. She was standing looking at me, and I would swear there were tears in her eyes. The sun was behind her, and her thin sundress didn't hide much. I could see the outline of her very womanly, very desirable body and felt myself respond. With superhuman effort, I wrenched my gaze from her. I felt a flash of disgust with myself. Here I was, not completely divorced, and I was drooling over a friend. Glenda went on with her conversation. She said, "I'm sorry for just dropping by, but I was on my way down to the tavern and wanted to congratulate you on your success today. I have to admit the phone wires have been buzzing this afternoon as people pass on your success in the lawsuit." Glenda looked at all of us and smiled gently, then continued, "I'll go now, but, well, be careful and don't. Oh, hell, I've heard already that Patty has some friends that are talking trash about you, and they have made some threats. I just wanted you to be careful and watch out. If you have too much more to drink, oh, hell, I'm sorry. I'll just go. Good night. Linda turned and rushed from the patio toward her car. We all just sat there and looked at each other. To say we were shocked was an understatement. Mother summed it up best when she said, "Oh, I just can't believe that. How could anyone? Why would anyone be that upset at us?" We continued talking for a short time about nothing of any consequence. I decided I was sober enough to return to my own home. I was getting ready to leave when the phone rang. Mother went in to answer it. I could hear her say, "Oh, no. When? Okay, he'll be there as soon as he can get there." She came out of the house crying and ran up to Dad. She said, "Cedric, that was the police. The silent alarms have gone off in the store, and they want you to come down and turn them off and see if anything is missing. They say the first car on the scene has said most of the windows have been broken out." Oh, Cedric, how could someone do something like this to us? Dad and I went to the store. When we got there, we found 2 patrol cars waiting on us. We went inside and turned off the alarm. We walked around and did not find anything obviously missing, but told the officers we would have to take an inventory to be sure. There was some damage to some of the items inside from where the rocks had hit. We called Mom and had her bring down some sleeping bags so we could spend the night. The next morning early, we called the insurance company and then made arrangements to have the glass replaced. I went home later that evening and found some of my windows also broken out. I called the police and reported the vandalism. Of course, they asked their questions, and when asked if I knew of anyone who might do something like this, I said, a few months ago I would have said no, but now, especially after what I was told yesterday afternoon late and what happened last night, I have to say I might. I just received a divorce because I caught my wife cheating with 2 of my friends. She used to be assistant manager at my parents' store. When I filed the divorce, Dad let her go. He had the books checked and found many improprieties. She filed a wrongful dismissal lawsuit against him, and he received a judgment in his favor yesterday. A friend told my parents and me that my ex-wife and 2 ex-friends had been making threatening comments. Now I wonder if either of them or her family could be involved in this. I know her father was extremely angry over the whole thing and cursed me several times. Of course, we had said something similar when the police took the report at the store. Now I was somewhat more sure we were on the right track. After the vandalism, things got back to normal, or at least as normal as they could be considering the hole that had been torn in our lives when Patty was forced out of them. My parents tried to get back to the way things were, and I struggled. Some days I would do okay, but usually when I got home, I would remember Patty, and the evenings would be crap. If I was working, I could function fine, but the alone times were bad because it had been several years since I had been truly alone all night. I began going out most evenings for supper. I usually had supper in one of the sports bars or local hangouts, so I began drinking more than I had before. Of course, this just tended to make me lonelier and angrier with Patty and her lovers. I would see some of my crew or some of the friends I still had from time to time. They would try to cheer me up and slow down my drinking, but I didn't let them. Occasionally, I would see Glinda, and she would try to get me to let it go. One Thursday evening, I was out and saw a group of women sitting around a table drinking and having a good time. One of the women caught my eye. It was Susan, George's wife. Now, as far as I knew, no one knew George had been one of Patty's lovers. I remembered my promise to make him pay and walked up to the table they were at. I bent down and said, "Hi, Susan. It's been ages since I saw you. Would you dance with me?" Susan looked up at me with a frown on her face, then she smiled. "Sure, Stan," she said. I smiled and took her hand to help her from the chair. I wrapped my arm around her waist as we walked to the dance floor. We had only danced a few seconds when the song ended. She started to head for the table, but I held her. I said, "Oh, come on, Sue. You promised me a dance, and we hadn't even gotten going yet when the song ended. Surely you can give me a whole song to dance to." Susan relaxed and smiled. She flowed back into my arms when the next song started, and we began swaying to the music. She sighed and said, "You always were a good dancer. I wish George would take me dancing more. I always loved to dance when we were dating." She laid her cheek on my chest, and we swayed to the music until the song ended. She started to the table before the next song started, but I held her hand. When she turned to look at me, I gave her a puppy dog look and said, "One more, please. For old time's sake." Susan looked toward her friends, then smiled a nervous smile and moved back into my arms. As we danced, I said, "I don't mean to make you nervous. Since Patty left, I've been so lonesome, and it feels good to at least be able to dance with someone again. Sometimes I don't know how I'm going to make it." Sue turned her head up to me and said, "Well, Stan, you brought it on yourself. If you weren't so jealous, you wouldn't have lost." I jerked my head back and glared at her. Before she could react, I hissed, "Jealous? I guess in a sense I was, but I'll be damned if I let my wife screw my friends and not do something about it. You're right. I kicked her out and I'd do it again, but I still miss her. It was Susan's turn to break in. She said, "What do you mean? I heard you were upset with Patty flirting and finally just kicked her out of the house, then filed for divorce." I stopped dancing and just held Susan as I explained what I had seen the night I caught Patty. I did leave George out of it this time because I still wanted to make him feel the pain of seeing his wife with someone else. When I finished talking, Susan looked at me and said, "Stan, I just can't believe that. I know Joe is a horn dog, but even he would not do that to a friend. I've known Patty all my life and she's just not that way. Are you sure you actually saw that?" Now I was pissed. I said, "Yeah, I know what I saw. If you don't believe me, come out to my house and I'll show you the pictures." I turned and started to walk away when Susan grabbed my arm. "Stan, I'm sorry, but, well, George said that you were just on a real tear." All at once I remembered I still had the pictures on my phone. I really wasn't thinking when I pulled it out and said, "Here, look at these pictures and tell me Patty or my friends wouldn't do something like that." I handed the phone to Susan and stood as she scrolled through the pictures. I heard her gasp when she saw the first one of Joe and Patty. I had forgotten about George. I remembered his picture was on the phone when I heard Susan cry out and I saw her stop scrolling through the pictures. She was staring at a picture, and then tears began rolling down her cheeks. I saw her move to the next picture and she began bawling. She dropped the phone and ran toward her friends. Now I felt like an a-hole. I ran after Susan and was intercepted by two of her friends. One of them said, "What did you do to her? I thought you were a friend. Why is she crying?" I pushed through the two of them and knelt by Susan's side. I took her hand and said, "Susan, I'm sorry. When you didn't believe me, I got angry and decided to prove I wasn't lying. I forgot I had the pictures of George on the phone." One of her friends grabbed my phone from the floor and as she started looking at the pictures said, "What pictures? Oh my God. That son of a witch." All the girls except for the one trying to calm Susan down gathered around my phone to look at the pictures. They were all muttering, and I could tell they weren't sure whether to be more angry with me or George. Finally, Susan looked up at me and said, "Just get out of here, Stan. Please just leave me alone." I stood and took my phone from the girls. I slowly walked away and drove back to my home. I felt like crap. I really did like Susan, and now I was party to her unhappiness. I wondered how I could have ever thought what I had planned to do to her was okay. I was sick at the hurt I had caused her just by letting her see the pictures. How much worse would it have been if I had taken her to bed and then sent the pictures to George before I let her see them? I was sitting on my patio communing with John Barleycorn when I heard a car drive into my driveway. I didn't move even when I heard the car door slam and the pounding on my front door. I took another drink and sat staring across my little slice of heaven. I could make out the shadows of the trees in the moonlight. Finally, I heard the tap, tap, tap of small feet coming around the house and a voice yelling, "Stan, where the hell are you? I know you're home. I can see your truck in the garage. Stan, I'm not leaving until you talk to me. Now open up." As she was saying that, the woman walked up to my back door and began banging on it. Finally, I had enough and said, "Okay, just stop banging on my house. I'm over here. What the hell do you want?" I turned and saw Glinda as she stomped up beside my chair. "Damn you, Stan. I just came from the bar and grill. Did you really have to hurt Susan like that? You just couldn't leave it alone, could you? I ought to beat the tar out of you." I sat and stared up at Glinda, then grabbed her arm as she slammed it down, trying to strike me. As I was wrestling with her, trying to keep her from hitting me, she lost her balance and fell into my lap. I quickly wrapped my arms around her and held on as I said, "Glinda, stop it. If you don't stop, I'm afraid one of us will get hurt. Look, I'm sorry I upset Susan tonight. It wasn't intentional. I had been thinking about what you said, and all I was doing was dancing with her." She began getting on my case because of the way I treated poor Patty, and I lost it. She told me I got what I deserved for being so jealous. Without thinking, I told her I had pictures of Joe and Patty on my phone.